Historians, religions and scientists have not been able to make a common decision about how the first man came to the world. The important issue for us is that people can be fed from different sources. There is a common view about the history of our food chain. We perform the first feeding by collecting foods from nature. Next, we find the fire and learn to cook the food. With fire, we begin to hunt and feed on meat. When we look at the statistics, we see that the human population has not increased much for thousands of years. In the 17th century, there were only 500 million human populations worldwide. Since we were few in number, we were able to feed by hunting animals in nature. But by the 18th century, our population rises to 1 billion. Hunting in the wild is no longer the solution to complete our food chain. We decide that we need to produce cattle to complete our food chain. In the 18th century, we begin to evolve cattle breeds. We produce species that are easy to grow and maintain, docile, high-yielding. In the last 200 years, we have been establishing farms to increase the number of cattle. We produce milk in these farms. This is where we get the meat necessary for our food chain. We make cheese varieties with the milk we obtain. We improve our health by consuming milk as a beverage. We drink milk for the rapid growth and development of our children. We eat healthier and live longer. Our population has increased 16 times in 300 years, reaching 8 billion. We are starting to produce artificial meat in laboratories to create an alternative to our food chain. Scientists are completing their studies on this subject. Recently, we are starting to consume fabricated meat. For a while, artificial milk has been produced and used in factories. How successful can scientists be with artificial foods during this transition period that will reach our grandchildren? With population growth, we are changing the genetics of agricultural products. We start eating tasteless products with little nutritional value. Will our grandchildren not know their first tastes of meat and dairy products, as with agricultural foods? Will meat products be eaten only at the tables of the rich or in luxury restaurants? In the future, will we not be able to eat natural meat? Will we not be able to see cheese varieties made from natural milk in the coming days? Will our grandchildren remember the cheese varieties? Our rapidly increasing population makes cattle breeding, which is difficult, even more difficult. Because of the high demand, breeders have to deal with more cattle. Due to this tiring, difficult and complex process, the number of cattle raising is decreasing day by day. If we make cattle breeding easier, can't we increase the number of people engaged in this business? Can't we delay the introduction of artificial meat and milk into our food chain? Can't we ensure that our grandchildren consume natural meat and milk? If we made things easier and automated, wouldn't it still be okay? If only you had a platform for cattle breeding that could monitor processes, report them and make automatic referrals. If only there was a constantly evolving process market. If it allows you to use common processes with the world. If it helps your business grow and make the right decisions. Still not? When you run the process, you can see the status of the work steps instantly. If you could look at the process steps in detail. If only you could set each step the way you want. If you can decide which step will work. If only you could have complete control. Still not? If you could process the data coming to your platform with programming languages. In the process step, you can edit the data that will enter the analysis with the codes you can write. If you could manage data from different sources on a single platform. If you could perform these operations with Python and Java, which are the most popular programming languages. If only you could use programming language capabilities with your own data. If you could add ready-made software language libraries to your platform. You can also run different analyses with coding within the process on your platform. If only you could feed other systems with data while the current system is running. Wish you could get notifications that you can customize while analytics is running. Before running the codes, you can preview the data that will come into the process. If you could see the values that will come in the data columns. If only you knew the types of data you can use. If you could have information about the data columns you will be processing. Wouldn't the codes you write be more consistent? If you can see the information in the console after running the codes. If you could debug values and codes. If you could examine the data changes that occurred as a result of the study, on the sample data. If you could revise the written code. If you can dominate the data that will come to the platform. Still not? If you could make your preferences and customizations on the steps and run your process. While the process is running, you can examine the status of the steps. If you could look at the analysis and automation part while the process is working in the back and processing the data. If you could check the general situation map. If you could evaluate the nutritional groups and the condition of the barns they are connected to, on a graphic. If you can access the cattle summary information, the status of the sensors and general information on the graph. If you could access holistic analyses from the menus. If you could see the identification, breed and age of the cattle you selected. If you had access to cattle health information, how it behaves on a daily basis, such as the amount of water to be drunk, the number of steps, the resting minute, the number of lying down, the rumination time, the amount of feeding and the free walking time. If you could see the goals for a healthy life by type. If you could assess how many of your health goals are being achieved on a daily basis. If you could look at the realized values with the targets. If you could check the difference. If you could examine the targeted and actual health scores with a schema. If only you could measure your success in terms of what needs to be done to keep the cattle healthy. If only you could see the breeding calendar of cattle. If you do not miss possible pregnancy times. If you don't have to wait and observe the cattle to determine the breeding time. If only you could receive notifications for cattle that are due for fertilization. Wouldn't it still happen if the breeding and spawning processes were easier? If you could see the summary information about milk production. If you could evaluate your efficiency and success in milk production. If you could predict how much milk you will produce in the coming years and how much of this production you can use as domestic consumption. If you could make evaluations according to your capacity usage. If you could estimate how much milk you would produce, consume and sell monthly. If you can make deals based on these amounts. If you could follow the milking automation instantly. If you could see the milking status of the cattle with a graph. According to the estimated milk yield, you can measure the values received as a percentage. If you could access the detailed information of the cattle from the main screen. If you could follow the feeding automation status on the screen. If you could measure and change the feed ration and energy levels prepared per cattle. If you could detect the disease in advance and automatically transfer information to the veterinarian. If you could automatically share the information of the cattle that are due for inspection with the veterinarian. If you could follow the weather conditions around the barn on the screen. If you could get a warning before a weather condition that will affect cattle health occurs. Still not? If you automate most of the processes you deal with. What if you reduce the workforce you spend? If you are less tired. If you do more efficient work. Still not? Can't we postpone the artificial meat and milk transition process?